A violent battle tears across deep space as two advanced starships unleash streams of energy fire at one another. Just when one vessel seems cornered, it suddenly tears open a glowing portal and dives straight through it, narrowly escaping destruction. Moments later, the damaged craft emerges near Earth's orbit, smashing through a satellite as it spirals toward the planet. Before the ship burns apart during re-entry, its alien pilot belonging to the deadly hunter species known as the Predators launches away inside an escape pod, while the main vessel plummets uncontrollably toward the surface below. Far away in the dense jungles of Mexico, elite sniper Quinn McKenna is carrying out a covert mission against a cartel operation. Right as he lines up his opening shot, the crashing alien ship tears through the sky overhead and slams into the forest nearby with explosive force, knocking Quinn violently off his feet. Dazed but alive, he regains consciousness and cautiously makes his way toward the wreckage. Among the scorched debris, Quinn discovers strange pieces of highly advanced armor unlike anything he's ever seen. Before he can fully process it, his fellow soldier Dupree suddenly appears behind him, startling him badly. Dupree hands Quinn a bag so they can collect some of the mysterious equipment. As Quinn experiments with one of the metallic gauntlets strapped to his arm, unsettling noises echo from the trees nearby. Looking up, the men discover the mutilated body of one of their teammates hanging upside down from a branch. Then the creature responsible finally reveals itself. A predator emerges from the shadows, almost invisible beneath its cloaking technology. The soldiers immediately open fire, but the alien moves with terrifying speed, dodging through the jungle while their bullets fail to connect. In an instant, the predator retaliates and brutally kills Dupree. Quinn rushes forward, but suddenly the gauntlet on his arm activates by itself, launching a powerful blast that slams into the predator and knocks it unconscious while simultaneously slicing the dangling corpse clean in half. Blood rains down from the trees, splattering across the alien and disabling parts of its camouflage system. Realizing this is far beyond anything he understands, Quinn grabs the recovered gear and escapes the area. As he flees, a small metallic sphere ejects from the armor, and Quinn instinctively catches it before disappearing into the jungle. Not long afterward, a heavily armed recovery unit led by government operative Will Traeger arrives at the crash site. His team quickly secures the Predator and scavenges whatever technology survived the wreck. From the way Traeger handles the situation, it's obvious this isn't humanity's first encounter with these extraterrestrial hunters. The next morning, Quinn reaches a nearby town and storms into a local bar, forcing everyone out at gunpoint to avoid witnesses. He pays the bartender to anonymously ship the bag containing the alien gear to his son's address back home. However, Quinn secretly keeps the small metal sphere for himself. While examining it, he accidentally discovers it can bend light and make him invisible. Realizing authorities may search him soon, he casually swallows the device with a drink. Elsewhere, Quinn's young son Rory sits quietly in class while other students play chess nearby. Rory has autism, making it difficult for him to connect socially, and most of the other kids either ignore him or treat him cruelly. Out in the hallway, two older boys trigger the school's fire alarm as a prank. The sudden noise sends the building into chaos, overwhelming Rory's senses and leaving him frozen in fear while everyone else evacuates. The bullies sneak back into the classroom during the confusion and intentionally knock over the chessboard before mocking Rory and walking away laughing. Once the alarm finally stops, Rory slowly approaches the scattered pieces. Thanks to his remarkable memory and pattern recognition, he carefully restores every single chess piece to its exact original position without hesitation. Later that day, a package arrives at Rory's house, the one Quinn secretly mailed earlier. At the same time, government agents intercept evolutionary biologist Dr. Casey Brackett at a public park and forcefully escort her into an unmarked vehicle without explanation. During the ride, they reveal classified photographs of the crashed escape pod and the Predator itself. Casey learns these alien beings have secretly visited Earth multiple times throughout history, and recently their appearances have been increasing at an alarming rate. That evening, Rory's mother Emily tries encouraging him to join the neighborhood Halloween festivities by bringing him costume masks for trick-or-treating. But Rory refuses, convinced the boys who bully him will recognize him no matter what disguise he wears. After everyone else goes upstairs, Rory sneaks into the basement and opens Quinn's package. Inside, he finds the Predator technology, instantly becoming fascinated by its strange design. While examining the alien gauntlet, the device unexpectedly powers on and begins interacting with him almost like a computer system. Rory quickly starts decoding and navigating its functions with astonishing ease. Meanwhile, Quinn has been detained by military authorities and subjected to a psychological evaluation, while Traeger closely observes from behind the glass. Quinn immediately realizes they intend to silence him permanently because of what he witnessed in the jungle. Soon after, he's loaded onto a prison transport bus alongside a group of mentally unstable military veterans and criminals, each stranger than the last. The prisoners relentlessly mock Quinn when he claims the government is covering up contact with an alien species, assuming he's insane like the rest of them. As the bus departs, Casey arrives at the secret research facility where Traeger introduces her to his scientific team. She's stunned to discover entire rooms filled with recovered alien artifacts, and even more shocked when she sees a live predator being held unconscious inside a containment chamber. After undergoing a full decontamination procedure, Casey is finally permitted to examine the creature up close. Traeger explains that the military nicknamed the species predators due to their obsession with hunting dangerous prey. Even more disturbing, recent biological tests found traces of human DNA mixed within the creature's genetic makeup. The researchers suspect the predators may somehow be experimenting with human evolution itself. Casey, disturbed by the implications, demands access to Quinn since he's the only eyewitness to the crash. Not long afterward, the prison bus suddenly receives orders to turn around and head back. At the exact same time, another massive alien ship, the same one pursuing the first vessel earlier, opens its own wormhole above Earth and enters the atmosphere. On board are two monstrous alien hunting dogs and a far larger, deadlier predator. The creature immediately begins tracking the signal emitted by Rory's activated gauntlet. Military radar systems detect the incoming craft, prompting fighter jets to scramble after it. But the alien ship moves with impossible speed, effortlessly outmaneuvering the aircraft pursuing it. Back at the research facility, disaster suddenly erupts. The captured predator abruptly awakens from sedation. Scientists and guards rush to restrain it, but the creature's raw strength is overwhelming. Within seconds, it breaks free and tears through everyone nearby with savage brutality. Panic spreads throughout the facility as alarms blare and bodies pile up. During the chaos, Casey grabs a tranquilizer rifle from a dead security guard, steals a biological sample from the predator, and desperately runs for the exit. Unfortunately, the security doors remain locked until a mandatory decontamination cycle finishes. With the enraged predator slaughtering people behind her, Casey has no choice but to stand trembling inside the sterilization chamber while the countdown slowly ticks away. At the facility, the escaped predator quickly realizes some of its equipment is still missing, specifically the helmet and the advanced gauntlet Quinn took from the crash site. Instead of wasting time attacking everything in sight, the creature immediately focuses on retrieving its lost gear. As it moves through the decontamination area, it notices Casey trapped inside the shower chamber. But since she poses no immediate danger, and because the open doorway gives it a clear path out, the predator simply ignores her and continues onward. Out in the hallway, the alien discovers another helmet stored by the scientists from previous encounters with its species. The moment it activates the device, a tracking system comes online, revealing the location of its missing equipment. The signal leads directly to Rory. One of the surviving researchers desperately urges Casey not to let the creature escape, but by then, it's already too late. Sirens continue blaring throughout the compound, while soldiers rush in from every direction, only to be slaughtered almost instantly as the predator carves a bloody path toward freedom. Outside, the prison bus suddenly screeches to a halt when the passengers spot the predator sprinting across the roof overhead. That single moment finally convinces the inmates Quinn had been telling the truth all along. Realizing the chaos gives them a chance to escape, the group stages a distraction by starting a violent fight inside the bus. As soon as the guards step in to break it up, the prisoners overwhelm them together, steal their weapons, and throw the guards out before taking control of the vehicle. At the same time, Casey races after the predator, while the creature suddenly notices the second alien spacecraft streaking across the sky with military fighter jets pursuing it. The predator immediately changes direction and follows. Trying to stop it, Casey leaps from a rooftop onto the moving prison bus while firing at the alien below. Unfortunately, in the confusion she accidentally shoots herself in the foot instead. Moments later, Quinn joins the attack and opens fire too, but the Predator retaliates by destroying one of the bus tires, forcing the vehicle to grind to a stop. While Quinn and the others scramble to find another way out, the fighter jets continue chasing the mysterious alien ship overhead, but the spacecraft suddenly vanishes using cloaking technology before reappearing long enough to obliterate both jets within seconds. Meanwhile, Casey narrowly survives another assassination attempt by Traeger's men, but Quinn's group arrives on stolen motorcycles just in time to rescue her before escaping the facility entirely. Not far away, the original Predator secretly hides inside the back of a departing military truck and silently massacres the soldiers riding inside as the vehicle drives away from the base. Soon after, the larger alien ship finally lands in a remote area. Two monstrous hunting hounds are released from the craft and immediately begin tracking the escaped Predator. Elsewhere, Quinn and the others take shelter inside a rundown motel while Casey recovers from her injury. When she finally wakes up, disoriented and terrified, she grabs a shotgun and nearly fires before Quinn calms her down and explains they aren't her enemies. He reveals Traeger's men tried to eliminate her because she stole evidence from the facility. Once she understands the situation, Casey agrees to help them and explains everything she learned about the Predators. As the conversation unfolds, Quinn suddenly realizes the escaped alien isn't hunting them at all. It's hunting Rory in order to recover its stolen technology. Back at home, Rory discovers the Predator helmet has activated. Curious, he places it on his head and unintentionally accesses recorded alien data. Through the helmet's interface, he watches footage explaining how predators genetically enhance themselves by injecting DNA from other species into their own bodies. That revelation finally explains why scientists discovered human DNA mixed within the creature earlier. Completely fascinated, Rory decides to use the helmet and gauntlet as part of his Halloween costume and heads out trick-or-treating. By the time Quinn and the others arrive at the house, Rory has already disappeared into the neighborhood. Quinn quickly explains the entire situation to Emily, who hands him a weapon so he can go after their son. Initially, the former soldiers refuse to risk their lives again. But after Emily passionately describes Quinn's skills and reminds them what kind of man he is, each member of the group gradually decides to join the rescue mission after all. To cover more ground, they split up into pairs and begin searching the area. Meanwhile, Rory's evening immediately turns miserable when the same boys from school recognize him despite the costume and start mocking him again. Trying to ignore them, Rory approaches a nearby house for candy, but nobody answers the door. Instead, the homeowner appears on the balcony above and joins in humiliating him, throwing something down toward Rory. The object strikes the alien helmet and instantly triggers its weapons system. A devastating energy blast erupts from the mask, vaporizing the man, destroying part of the house, and sending nearby children screaming in terror as they flee the street. Quinn and Casey spot the explosion from a distance and race toward it. Panicked by what just happened, Rory drops the helmet and runs away until he reaches a deserted baseball field. There he encounters what appears to be a stray dog and immediately bonds with it, unaware of the danger nearby. Seconds later, the alien hounds arrive. The creatures prepare to attack Rory, but Quinn suddenly crashes into them with a car, knocking them aside just in time. The rest of the team soon arrives as well, and while Casey rushes Rory to safety, the others unleash gunfire on the beasts. One of the hounds charges after Quinn through the field. After a frantic chase, Quinn manages to shove several grenades into the creature's mouth and detonates them with a perfectly timed shot, blowing the beast apart. The second hound is eventually gunned down by the others moments later. As Casey begins collecting biological samples from one of the dead creatures, a new threat suddenly appears. The massive upgraded Predator emerges from the darkness and grabs Nettles, holding him hostage while demanding the humans surrender their weapons. The group reluctantly drops their guns, but Quinn quickly ignores the order, snatches up his rifle again, and fires directly at the creature. The distraction forces the Predator to release Nettles. Everyone immediately runs for cover inside Rory's school while the enraged alien blasts apart the entrance behind them. Knowing the Predator is after the stolen technology, Quinn removes the small computer-like device from Rory's gauntlet. The creature storms into the building moments later and lifts Quinn off the ground by his throat. Quinn reluctantly hands the device back. But before the alien can react, something suddenly yanks it violently backward through a window. The original predator has returned. As Quinn's group escapes in their vehicle, the two predators engage in a brutal battle outside. Unfortunately, the smaller predator stands no chance. The upgraded giant savagely smashes its opponent into a car before gruesomely ripping out its skull and spine as a trophy. Police sirens begin approaching the area, so the victorious predator quickly scans the stolen device, identifying Quinn and the others before activating its camouflage and disappearing into the night. After escaping, Quinn contacts Emily to make sure she's safe. Unfortunately, government agents are already monitoring her location. Realizing the danger, Emily destroys her phone before the signal can expose Quinn's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Traeger and his team recover the body of the dead predator. Examining the evidence, Traeger concludes that the larger predator was hunting the smaller one because it stole something extremely valuable. Determined to recover it himself, Traeger realizes the key to finding the alien ship is Rory. Elsewhere, Quinn's group hides inside an abandoned barn while Casey studies the biological sample she stole earlier. Her analysis confirms the horrifying truth. The predators are actively upgrading themselves through genetic modification. Suddenly, strange noises echo from outside. To everyone's surprise, the second alien hound survived the earlier explosion and tracked them to the barn. But instead of attacking, the creature behaves almost exactly like a domesticated dog. Nettles stops the others from shooting it, believing it may actually become useful. Casey cautiously attempts to communicate with the animal-like creature, but before she can learn anything, a helicopter suddenly descends nearby. Traeger has arrived. Thinking quickly, Casey throws an object into the distance, distracting the hound and sending it running out of sight just before Traeger's forces enter the area. The rest of the group hides while Traeger confronts Quinn and Casey directly, demanding to know where the missing alien gauntlet is located. When Quinn and Casey refuse to reveal the location of the alien gauntlet, Traeger's men immediately turn violent. Quinn is beaten while Casey is dragged aside for questioning. During the interrogation, Traeger finally explains the terrifying truth behind the Predator's recent visits to Earth. According to him, the creatures have concluded that humanity is destroying the planet and heading toward extinction. Because of that, the Predators have started harvesting the strongest genetic traits from other species, including humans, in an effort to evolve themselves before civilization collapses completely. Meanwhile, back at Emily's house, government agents continue tearing through the place searching for alien technology, but their operation is interrupted in horrifying fashion when the upgraded Predator suddenly smashes its way inside. Emily quickly hides while the creature slaughters every agent in the house within seconds. After the massacre, the Predator examines Rory's desk and discovers a hand-drawn map showing the hidden location of the alien ship. At that exact same moment, Rory is absent-mindedly sketching the very same map somewhere else. One of the agents supervising him notices the drawing and instantly realizes what it means. He immediately informs Traeger. Without wasting time, Traeger orders Rory loaded into a helicopter so they can head directly to the ship. Quinn and Casey are left behind with only a handful of armed men assigned to execute them once the helicopter departs. That plan fails almost immediately. Despite being restrained and outnumbered, Quinn effortlessly takes down 2 guards using his combat skills. The third agent nearly manages to kill Casey, but out of nowhere, the surviving alien hound suddenly charges into the room and vomits up a live grenade. The bizarre distraction gives Casey just enough time to smash the agent with a chair before diving away moments ahead of the explosion. As Quinn fights his way out, he encounters Nebraska violently beating the last remaining guard unconscious. Reuniting with Casey, the group quickly realizes they still need a way to escape the area. Luckily, the rest of Quinn's team suddenly arrives in a stolen helicopter to rescue them, while the tamed alien hound chases after them from below like an oversized pet. Not long afterward, everyone reaches the hidden crash site of the larger alien spacecraft. Traeger forces Rory to unlock the ship using his unusual ability to understand Predator technology. Once the massive entrance opens, Traeger orders his men to seize every piece of alien equipment they can find. But suddenly, one of the agents is violently thrown aside. It turns out Quinn secretly infiltrated the area using the cloaking sphere he swallowed earlier. Now invisible, he ambushes the guards and quickly incapacitates several of them before capturing Traeger and dragging him outside. Beyond the ship, Quinn's allies are already surrounding the area and exchanging gunfire with Traeger's remaining soldiers. Then, everything goes wrong again. One of Quinn's men is suddenly attacked by the upgraded Predator hiding nearby. Before dying, he manages to fire a flare gun into the sky, accidentally exposing everyone's position. The distraction allows Traeger to break free from Quinn's grip and escape, instantly triggering a massive firefight between both sides. Quinn grabs Rory and takes cover, handing him the cloaking device for protection while chaos erupts all around them. At the same time, the upgraded Predator crashes into the battlefield and begins massacring Traeger's men. During the carnage, a nearby jeep flips over and explodes. Moments later, the Predator enters the alien ship itself. A painful sound suddenly blasts through hidden speakers, nearly rupturing everyone's ears before the system begins translating the message into human language. The smaller Predator, the one killed earlier, had apparently recorded a warning. It explains that it came to Earth specifically to destroy the upgraded Predator ship and prevent its technology from falling into the wrong hands. The message also declares that McKenna is to be claimed as a trophy because he is considered the greatest warrior among the humans present. Before the transmission ends, the ship activates a self-destruct countdown. Realizing they're all about to die, Quinn and Traeger temporarily put aside their conflict and agree to work together long enough to escape. Even then, Traeger can't resist trying to steal alien technology on the way out, but the surviving Hound immediately blocks him from taking anything. Both groups retreat deep into the surrounding forest just before the ship detonates in an enormous explosion behind them. For a brief moment, the survivors think they may have escaped. Then, an eerie sound cuts through the trees. Suddenly, a spinning Predator weapon slices through the darkness and severs one agent's arm instantly. Instead of helping the wounded man, Traeger coldly shoots him in the head, deciding he's now dead weight. The upgraded Predator immediately drags the corpse away to feed. Panic spreads as the humans retreat through the woods while firing blindly into the darkness. Two members of Quinn's group volunteer to act as bait in hopes of distracting the creature long enough for the others to survive. The plan works. Drawn by the noise, the Predator launches into the middle of the group and begins tearing through everyone with terrifying force. Bullets barely slow it down. Traeger even attempts to use stolen Predator technology against the creature, but the weapon backfires horribly and blows his head apart instead. Eventually, the Predator is set on fire during the battle, but the flames barely seem to affect it. The two volunteers manage to wound the creature and shove it down a hill, but their own injuries are catastrophic. Knowing they won't survive much longer, the pair choose to mercifully end each other's suffering before the pain consumes them. Just when Quinn thinks the nightmare may finally be over, the Predator suddenly returns. This time, instead of attacking everyone indiscriminately, the creature specifically targets Rory. It violently throws Quinn and Casey aside before grabbing the boy. Only then does Quinn realize the message about McKenna was never referring to him at all. Rory is the true target because the Predators believe his extraordinary mind represents the next stage of human evolution. The alien drags Rory aboard its spacecraft and prepares for takeoff. During the struggle, Rory accidentally drops the small cloaking sphere onto the ground below. Desperate to save him, Quinn, Nebraska, and Nettles leap onto the outside of the ship just as it begins lifting into the sky. Casey tries to jump aboard too, but the rising craft knocks her away before she can grab on. Inside the ship, Rory sees the Predator activating an energy force field around the exterior. Using the communication system, he quickly warns Quinn. Quinn narrowly dodges the field in time, but Nebraska remains trapped outside its protection zone. Even worse, Nettles is horrifically sliced apart at the legs by the energy barrier before falling from the aircraft to his death below. Realizing there's no other option, Nebraska sacrifices himself by deliberately throwing his body into one of the ship's turbines. The impact destabilizes the craft and sends it spiraling downward. Using the force field as temporary cover, Quinn finally manages to sneak inside the ship and attack the Predator directly. He lands a few shots, but the violently shaking spacecraft throws him off balance before he can finish the creature. Quinn nearly falls to his death and only survives because one of his legs becomes tangled in hanging cables. The damaged ship eventually crashes back to Earth. The upgraded Predator emerges from the wreckage furious and immediately attacks Quinn. Despite all his training, Quinn simply isn't physically strong enough to overpower the massive alien in hand-to-hand combat. The Predator easily dominates the fight and prepares to kill him once and for all. Then, without warning, Casey suddenly appears behind the creature while using the cloaking sphere to stay invisible. She leaps onto the Predator's back and fires directly into its head at close range. The attack knocks the creature off balance long enough for Quinn to push it over the edge of the wreckage. As it falls, Rory activates the ship's force field again, severing one of the Predator's arms completely. Casey catches the detached arm and tosses it toward Quinn. Understanding immediately, Quinn uses the alien weapon mounted on the limb to blast the Predator backward before finally finishing it off with several gunshots to the head. At last, the nightmare is over. In the aftermath, Quinn quietly gathers personal belongings from the friends they lost during the battle. Together, he and Rory take a moment to honor the fallen men who sacrificed themselves to keep them alive. Sometime later, Quinn arrives at a newly established government facility dedicated to preparing Earth for future alien threats. Thanks to Rory's unmatched understanding of Predator technology, scientists have finally unlocked the mysterious object the smaller Predator was protecting all along. The stolen item turns out to be an incredibly advanced combat suit known as the Predator Killer. According to Rory, the rogue Predator intended to deliver the armor to humanity so humans would have a chance to defend themselves against the Predator species in the future. As scientists activate the device, the armor suddenly unfolds and wraps itself around one of the researchers like a living weapons system. Everyone braces for disaster, expecting it to fire, but after a tense moment, the suit powers down and retracts harmlessly. Watching the machine in awe, Quinn smirks and confidently declares that the armor now belongs to him. When people talk about the Predator, I think the reaction to the movie actually started long before anyone even sat down to watch it, because this wasn't just another random sci-fi action release. This carried the weight of the Predator name, and honestly, that franchise has always had a weird reputation. Everybody agrees the original 1987 film is a classic. That's the one people protect. Even people who aren't hardcore Predator fans still respect that movie because it's just solid. Simple premise, tense atmosphere, memorable characters, iconic creature design. It works. After that, though, the series kind of became this mixed bag where every sequel had defenders, but none of them really escaped the shadow of the original. So when the Predator got announced, there was this cautious optimism around it, especially because Shane Black was involved. That mattered to people. He wasn't some studio hire who had no connection to the franchise. He was literally in the first movie. And beyond that, the guy had a strong track record with action writing. So naturally, fans started thinking maybe this was finally going to be the movie that brought the series back properly. And to be fair, the marketing absolutely leaned into that idea. The trailers sold this thing like a return to basics. Back to Earth. Back to soldiers. Back to practical brutality. Back to the vibe of the original Hunt. It gave off this impression that the franchise was stripping away the overcomplicated crossover stuff and getting mean again. That's why the disappointment hit people so hard, because the movie almost immediately feels like it wants to be something completely different. And what's interesting is, I actually understand why reactions became so extreme. Some people absolutely despise this movie, like genuinely angry at it. Others defend it as dumb fun and think the backlash went overboard. And honestly, both sides make sense to me because The Predator is one of those films where your expectations basically decide your experience before the opening act is even finished. If you walked in wanting another tense survival horror action film like the original, yeah, this movie probably felt like a betrayal. But if you approached it like a loud, chaotic, self-aware sci-fi action comedy, you could at least find things to enjoy in it. The problem is that the film itself never fully commits either way. It keeps bouncing between trying to honor the original and trying to reinvent the tone entirely. One second it wants to remind you of the old-school Predator movies, the next it feels closer to a modern superhero blockbuster with aliens and gore. That clash is constant. And I think that's where the franchise legacy conversation becomes unavoidable, because the Predator spends so much time referencing the past without really understanding why people loved those earlier movies in the first place. The original film wasn't beloved because it had endless lore or giant CGI spectacle. It wasn't about upgraded predators or universe building or explaining every detail about the species. It worked because it was stripped down. A bunch of tough soldiers slowly realizing they were completely outmatched by something smarter and deadlier than them. The simplicity was the strength. This movie seems almost uncomfortable with simplicity. It keeps trying to make everything bigger. Bigger predator, bigger mythology, bigger action, bigger stakes, bigger humor, bigger finale. It's like the movie thinks escalation automatically equals excitement. But somewhere in that process, the atmosphere got lost. And that's why so many longtime fans reacted negatively. Not because they demanded a shot-for-shot remake of the original, but because they wanted the franchise to feel dangerous again. They wanted suspense, tension, patience, that feeling that something unseen was stalking the characters. Instead, the Predator often feels loud from scene one. It barely slows down. It throws jokes, action scenes, exposition, gore, and CGI chaos at the screen non-stop, which, depending on your mood, can either feel entertaining or exhausting. What really fascinates me, though, is that even people who hated the movie still admitted there were moments where they saw potential. That's the frustrating part. There are flashes of a genuinely fun Predator movie buried inside this thing. Some of the action works, some of the cast chemistry works, a few jokes actually land. The violence can be entertaining in this over-the-top B-movie way. But the overall experience leaves this weird feeling behind where you keep thinking about the movie that could have existed instead, especially because the expectations were genuinely high. This wasn't some cheap direct-to-streaming sequel nobody cared about. Fans wanted this to succeed. A lot of people went into it rooting for it. Even viewers who had heard negative reviews still gave it a chance because the Predator franchise still has goodwill attached to it. There's nostalgia there, respect there, and honestly, the movie almost relies on that goodwill at times. It keeps throwing little callbacks and familiar elements at the audience, almost like reminders of what the franchise used to feel like. But references only go so far. Eventually, the movie has to stand on its own, and that's where the divide really happens. Because for some viewers, this became the point where the series officially lost its identity. The moment Predator stopped feeling like sci-fi horror and started feeling like generic franchise content, just another studio product trying to modernize an older property by making everything louder and more excessive. For others, though, it's nowhere near that serious. They see it as messy but entertaining. A late-night popcorn movie with gore, monsters, ridiculous humor, and enough energy to stay watchable. Not great, not memorable, but fun enough. And honestly, I get that perspective too. I don't think The Predator is the unwatchable disaster some people describe. But I completely understand why fans who loved the original walked away frustrated. Because when a franchise has one truly iconic entry hanging over it, every sequel ends up fighting that comparison whether it wants to or not. And this movie never escapes it, not for 1 second. Every decision it makes, the humor, the pacing, the giant CGI action, the upgraded Predator concept, constantly reminds you how different it feels from the movie that started all of this. Sometimes different is good. Franchises need to evolve, or they become stale. But evolution only works when the core identity survives. That's the thing The Predator struggles with most. It remembers the imagery of the franchise. The masks, the weapons, the jungle warrior energy, the trophy hunting mythology, all of that is still here. But the tone, the suspense, the primal simplicity that made Predator feel special in the first place, that's the part that feels strangely missing. And because of that, the movie ends up stuck in this awkward place where it's too messy to fully satisfy old fans, but also too tied to franchise nostalgia to completely reinvent itself for new audiences. So what you're left with is this weird contradiction of a film, a movie people were genuinely excited for, that somehow became one of the most divisive entries in the entire franchise. I think one of the biggest reasons The Predator hit people so strangely is because of the names attached to it. If this exact same movie had been directed by some random studio filmmaker nobody cared about, the reaction probably would have been very different. People might have shrugged, called it another messy franchise sequel, and moved on. But this was Shane Black. That instantly changes the expectations. Because Shane Black isn't just connected to the Predator franchise. He was literally in the original movie. He played Hawkins back in the 1987 film, the guy cracking jokes before things started going horribly wrong. So already there's this built-in trust from fans. You assume someone who was part of the original understands why people love it. Then you add the rest of his career on top of that. This is the guy behind Lethal Weapon, The Last Boy Scout, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, The Nice Guys. Even Iron Man 3, which people still argue about, at least had personality. Shane Black has always had a very recognizable style. Fast dialogue, sarcastic humor, broken characters, Christmas settings for some reason, people talking over each other, weird energy bouncing between comedy and violence. When it works, it really works. And honestly, pairing that style with Predator doesn't sound like a bad idea at all. Same thing with Fred Dekker. Between Night of the Creeps and the Monster Squad, there was this expectation that these guys could bring back practical, nasty, fun sci-fi horror with actual character personality instead of bland studio seriousness. That's why the disappointment feels more personal with this movie, because you can actually see pieces of their style all over it. This doesn't feel like a film directed by committee from top to bottom. It feels like Shane Black trying to make a Shane Black Predator movie, while the franchise itself keeps resisting him. And that creates this really weird tension throughout the whole thing. There are scenes where the movie almost turns into a dark buddy comedy. The soldiers are constantly insulting each other, throwing out awkward jokes, swearing non-stop, acting like damaged weirdos instead of polished action heroes. You can absolutely feel Black's fingerprints there. Sometimes it works too. That's the frustrating part. A few exchanges genuinely made me laugh. Certain bits of banter have that loose, messy rhythm Shane Black movies are known for. It feels improvised even when it probably isn't. Characters interrupt each other, say dumb things, react awkwardly. There's at least an attempt to avoid the sterile Marvel style. Setup, punchline, structure. But then the movie pushes it too far. Every scene starts trying to out-joke the previous one. Emotional moments get interrupted. Suspense gets interrupted. Horror gets interrupted. The film becomes so obsessed with sounding irreverent that it forgets the Predator itself is supposed to feel threatening. That's where the identity crisis really kicks in. Because the movie clearly wants to satirize macho action films while simultaneously being one. It wants to mock the absurdity of these tough guy military archetypes, but it also wants you to cheer when they unload machine guns into alien creatures 5 minutes later. And again, that kind of balancing act can work. Shane Black has pulled that off before. Kiss Bang Bang works because underneath all the sarcasm and chaos, there's still structure, there's control. The Nice Guys is ridiculous, but the movie knows exactly what tone it's aiming for. The Predator feels like a version of that style where nobody ever hit the brakes. The humor just keeps escalating. The weirdness keeps escalating. The violence escalates. The story escalates. Every character becomes more exaggerated scene by scene until the whole thing starts drifting dangerously close to self-parody. And some viewers genuinely believe it crosses that line completely. What's interesting, though, is that I don't think Shane Black was trying to make a bad Predator movie. I actually think he was trying to drag the franchise away from taking itself too seriously. You can feel that rebellious energy all over the film. It almost feels like he looked at the franchise and thought, okay, everybody already knows what Predator is, so let's make this ugly, chaotic, funny, vulgar, and weird. The problem is, Predator might not actually be the right franchise for that approach, or at least not to this extent. Because underneath all the jokes and satire, people still expect the creature to feel dangerous. They still want tension. They still want atmosphere. And this movie keeps undercutting those things before they can fully develop. There's this strange feeling watching it where the film almost seems embarrassed to be sincere for too long. Every time a scene starts becoming tense, somebody says something ridiculous. Every time an emotional beat appears, another joke crashes through the wall. It's like the movie doesn't trust seriousness enough to sit still with it. And honestly, I think that's why reactions became so split. Some people connected with the chaotic Shane Black energy. They liked the political incorrectness, the abrasive humor, the weird ensemble dynamic, the fact that the movie felt messy and unfiltered instead of corporate and sanitized. Other people absolutely hated that approach because it made the franchise feel goofy instead of intimidating. And depending on the scene, I kinda understand both reactions. There are moments where the film genuinely feels like a satire of action movie excess. The dialogue gets so over the top that it almost starts winking at the audience. Certain characters feel intentionally absurd. Even the violence sometimes feels exaggerated in this almost cartoonish way. But then the movie suddenly wants emotional investment again. It wants the father-son storyline to matter. It wants the Predator mythology to feel important. It wants dramatic stakes. That tonal whiplash never really stops. And the more the movie goes on, the more it starts feeling like multiple versions of the same film fighting each other. One version is Shane Black's sarcastic action comedy. Another version is a studio blockbuster trying to modernize a franchise. Another version still wants to be old-school Predator survival horror. They never fully merge together. That's why the movie often feels off, even in scenes that should work. There's always some conflicting tone underneath the surface, pulling things in another direction. Honestly, the behind-the-scenes stories about reshoots and studio interference make complete sense when you watch the finished product, because this really does feel like a movie that got reshaped repeatedly during production. Certain scenes feel cut oddly, storylines start and disappear, character motivations shift around, some emotional beats barely land before the film sprints away from them. And that's unfortunate because there are flashes of a much sharper movie hidden in here. You can see moments where Shane Black's style almost clicks with the franchise. The rough camaraderie between the soldiers, the awkward humor in dangerous situations, the grimy R-rated violence, the idea of damaged people thrown into chaos together, there's something there. But the movie keeps overwhelming itself. Instead of sharpening the concept, it keeps adding more comedy, more mythology, more spectacle, more characters, more quirky behavior, more giant action sequences. Eventually, the film becomes so overloaded that none of its individual strengths fully land the way they should. And that's probably the most frustrating thing about The Predator creatively. It's not a soulless movie. Messy? Absolutely. Overstuffed? Definitely. Tonally confused? Constantly. But it doesn't feel passionless. In fact, sometimes it feels too passionate. Like Shane Black had 10 different ideas for how to reinvent Predator and tried squeezing all of them into one movie. The result is this strange contradiction where the film has a strong personality, but also feels completely unsure of itself. And maybe that's why it's still kind of fascinating to talk about years later. Because even people who dislike the movie usually admit it's not forgettable. It swings hard. Sometimes wildly hard. Sometimes directly into a wall. But at least there's a filmmaker behind it making choices instead of just sleepwalking through franchise maintenance. Unfortunately, those choices also push the series further away from what many fans actually wanted. Not bigger mythology. Not louder comedy. Not satire. They just wanted the Predator to feel terrifying again. The weird thing about the Predator is that if you explain the basic premise out loud, just the raw setup, it actually sounds kind of fun. You've got a Predator crash landing on Earth during a military mission, a sniper named Quinn McKenna survives the encounter, steals some alien tech, and secretly mails it away before the government can silence him. That package ends up with his young son Rory, who accidentally activates the technology and basically alerts more predators to Earth's location. Meanwhile, secret military groups, scientists, escaped soldiers, upgraded alien hunters, and giant predator dogs all start colliding into one giant disaster. Honestly, that sounds like a solid B-movie setup. There's a version of this story that could have been really entertaining. Lean into the paranoia, keep the scale tight, let the Predator hunt people through forests and military compounds while different factions scramble over alien technology. That works. You can absolutely see the potential in there. But the movie almost immediately starts overcomplicating itself. That's the thing I kept noticing while watching it. Every time the plot found a simple direction, the film would suddenly introduce another layer, another subplot, another explanation, another twist about Predator DNA or evolution or government secrets or intergalactic motives. It just keeps stacking ideas on top of ideas until the whole thing starts wobbling under its own weight. And the frustrating part is that Predator as a franchise never really needed this much mythology in the first place. The original film worked because it was brutally straightforward. Soldiers in a jungle. Something hunts them. Done. Even the best sequels understood that simplicity mattered. You can expand the setting, sure, but the core appeal is still survival against an unstoppable hunter. The Predator feels like it's trying to turn that into an entire cinematic universe. Suddenly there are different Predator agendas, rogue predators, upgraded predators, genetic experiments, secret research divisions, discussions about human evolution, alien armor systems, predator hounds, predator technology being decoded by a child genius. It becomes this avalanche of concepts that the movie never fully organizes. At times, it honestly feels less like a Predator movie and more like 3 unfinished sci-fi action scripts forced together. And because of that, the narrative starts losing focus really fast. The film introduces interesting threads, then abandons them almost immediately. Quinn's trauma and PTSD are hinted at, but barely explored. His family situation matters when the plot needs emotional stakes, then disappears into the background. The military conspiracy stuff sounds important early on, but eventually just becomes another excuse for people yelling at each other while explosions happen nearby. Even the predators themselves become weirdly confusing. There's a point where the movie starts juggling multiple alien motivations and genetic upgrade concepts, and instead of becoming more interesting, it actually gets harder to stay emotionally connected. The more the film explains, the less invested I became, which is kind of the opposite of what you want. And then there's the movie's obsession with escalation. Everything has to be bigger. Not just bigger action scenes, either bigger creatures, bigger lore, bigger stakes, bigger reveals. The Upgrade. Predator is probably the clearest example of that mindset. It genuinely feels like someone in a studio meeting asked, "How do we make the Predator more intense?" And the immediate answer was just, "Make him huge." That's basically the creative philosophy of the whole movie. And look, I understand the instinct. Modern franchise filmmaking is obsessed with escalation. Not in the sense that it's impossible to follow. I think some people exaggerate that part. You can generally understand the broad strokes. Predator comes to Earth, military gets involved, another Predator shows up, everybody fights over alien technology, chaos happens. That part's clear enough. The issue is more that the movie doesn't know what deserves focus. It keeps introducing story threads like they're incredibly important, then abandoning them halfway through. Quinn's PTSD gets brought up early and feels like it might shape his character in a meaningful way, then it mostly vanishes. The family drama appears whenever the movie wants emotional weight, then disappears when explosions need to happen. Government conspiracy stuff enters the story, but eventually just turns into generic evil military guys yelling in dark rooms material. Even character motivations feel slippery. People change sides emotionally from scene to scene depending on what the movie needs at that exact moment. Certain relationships develop weirdly fast. Entire emotional beats feel skipped over. You'll have scenes where characters suddenly trust each other or risk their lives for each other without the movie really earning that shift. And honestly, it creates this strange disconnected feeling where everything technically moves forward, but nothing feels properly built. That's why the exposition becomes such a problem too. This movie talks a lot. Characters are constantly explaining Predator DNA, alien motives, government operations, evolution theories, military cover-ups, autism theories, Predator technology. It just never stops unloading information. But weirdly, the more the movie explains things, the less grounded the story starts feeling, because the exposition isn't clarifying the narrative, it's cluttering it. There are scenes where people sound less like human beings and more like walking plot delivery systems. Everybody's either explaining something, shouting something, or making sarcastic comments while explaining something. And since the movie barely slows down between these moments, there's almost no room for atmosphere or reflection. That's where the storytelling really starts collapsing for me. The original Predator understood pacing in a very simple but effective way. It let tension breathe. It let paranoia build. You spend time with the team before things fully spiraled into horror. This movie acts like silence would physically hurt it. There's always another joke, another action beat, another explanation, another subplot. It's exhausting after a while. And honestly, the editing makes it feel even stranger. You can absolutely feel the reshoots and studio interference underneath the finished film. Some scenes cut awkwardly. Certain transitions feel abrupt. Plot points evolve so suddenly that it feels like entire connective scenes are missing. There are moments where characters appear somewhere new, and you almost feel like you skipped 10 minutes accidentally. The movie has that rewritten during post-production energy all over it. And what's frustrating is that the seams are visible enough that you start imagining a different version of the film while watching it. A tighter version, a cleaner version, one where certain storylines actually paid off, instead of dangling awkwardly in the background. Because there are so many dangling threads here. The movie hints at deeper emotional material involving Quinn and his family. It doesn't really follow through. It introduces ideas about trauma among the soldiers. Barely explored. Predator motivations shift around constantly. The evolution angle gets pushed heavily, then handled so clumsily that it almost feels unfinished. Even the movie's central conflict becomes weirdly unfocused. At first it seems like survival against the Predator. Then it becomes about government secrecy. Then it's about retrieving alien technology. Then suddenly, there are upgraded predators with different agendas. Then the film pivots into saving humanity from extinction-level threats. The scale just keeps inflating. And the bigger the story gets, the less tension it has. That's such a strange contradiction in the movie. Technically, the stakes are enormous. Humanity itself is supposedly at risk. But emotionally, the film rarely feels intense because the storytelling keeps scattering your attention in too many directions. Nothing gets enough time to become genuinely suspenseful. Even the action scenes suffer from that structurally. There are moments where something exciting should be happening, but because the narrative foundation is so shaky, the sequences start feeling like noise instead of progression. Characters run, shoot, scream, crash into another set piece, then immediately move into another exposition scene. There's barely any rhythm to it. And then there's the tonal instability layered on top of all this. That part honestly makes the narrative problems even worse, because the film never fully commits to what kind of story it's telling. A scene might begin as horror, shift into comedy, then suddenly ask for emotional sincerity, then explode into CGI chaos 5 seconds later. So even when the plot technically connects point A to point B, the emotional flow doesn't. That's why so many scenes feel oddly disposable. Not because nothing is happening, but because the movie rushes past everything before it can leave an impression. The final act is probably the clearest example of the storytelling just completely losing control of itself. By that point, the movie has introduced so many concepts and moving parts that the climax basically turns into giant blockbuster escalation for its own sake. Massive predator fights, huge action beats, constant gunfire, digital destruction, sequel teases, people flying everywhere. It feels less like a conclusion and more like the movie trying to distract you from how little narrative cohesion is left. And honestly, the sequel bait ending might be one of the clearest symptoms of the movie's storytelling mindset overall. Instead of resolving its ideas properly, it immediately starts trying to set up future ideas, bigger ideas, franchise ideas, universe-building ideas. Meanwhile, the actual movie we're watching still feels unfinished. That's the irony of The Predator. It's so desperate to expand the franchise that it forgets to fully shape the story directly in front of it. And look, I don't think this is one of those nothing makes sense disaster movies where the plot is completely incomprehensible. There is a narrative here. There's structure somewhere underneath the chaos. It's just buried. Buried under reshoots, tonal confusion, exposition overload, unfinished character arcs, constant escalation, and way too many competing ideas all fighting for screen time at once. Which is why the movie ends up feeling strangely hollow despite constantly throwing things at the audience. It's loud, busy, hyperactive, but never fully satisfying. You don't walk away confused because the movie is too smart. You walk away exhausted because the movie never figured out what mattered most. The tone of The Predator is probably the single biggest reason people either kind of enjoy the movie or absolutely cannot stand it. Because this isn't just a Predator movie with jokes in it. The entire film is built around comedy. That's the thing a lot of people weren't expecting. Even knowing Shane Black was directing, I don't think most fans realized just how aggressively comedic this movie was going to be, and not in a smooth way either. This thing swings between horror, satire, vulgar comedy, military banter, emotional family drama, and full-on blockbuster insanity sometimes within the same scene. It's honestly kind of fascinating to watch, because the movie never settles into one emotional rhythm for very long. A serious moment starts building, somebody says something ridiculous, a predator attack happens, somebody makes a sex joke, a character dies, somebody immediately undercuts the scene with sarcasm. It just keeps doing that over and over. Now, to be fair, I don't automatically think humor is a bad fit for Predator. The original movie had humor too. The soldiers joked around constantly. Even Predator 2 had this grimy, chaotic energy to it, and Shane Black's whole career is basically built on mixing violence with comedy and abrasive dialogue. So the idea itself isn't the problem. The problem is balance. Because The Predator doesn't use comedy to relieve tension, it replaces tension with comedy. That's a huge difference. The earlier films understood when to stop joking and let the atmosphere take over. Here, it feels like the movie is genuinely uncomfortable being serious for more than 30 seconds at a time. Every scene has to be interrupted by banter, swearing, awkward humor, or some kind of "look how weird these characters are" moment. And honestly, some of it works. That's what makes this movie frustrating to talk about. There are jokes in here that genuinely made me laugh. A couple of the visual gags land really well. Certain exchanges between the soldiers have that messy Shane Black rhythm where it feels like exhausted people talking nonsense under pressure. Keegan-Michael Key and Thomas Jane especially understand the assignment. Some of their scenes feel less like scripted action dialogue and more like two unstable guys trying to amuse themselves while everything collapses around them. And when the humor works, the movie suddenly becomes weirdly entertaining. You can almost see the version of the film Shane Black probably wanted to make. This nasty, chaotic, politically incorrect sci-fi action comedy where damaged military weirdos stumble through alien carnage while insulting each other non-stop. There's an audience for that. Definitely. But the movie pushes the comedy so hard that eventually it starts suffocating everything else around it. That's where the tonal whiplash becomes a real problem, because the Predator itself stops feeling scary, and that's kind of fatal for this franchise, the creature used to create dread. Even in the more action-heavy sequels, there was still this feeling that something dangerous was lurking nearby. In The Predator, the atmosphere barely gets a chance to exist before another joke barges into the room carrying a flamethrower. The film almost treats sincerity like a weakness. And the weirdest part is that the humor itself is all over the place stylistically. Sometimes it's sharp, sarcastic banter, sometimes it's dark comedy, sometimes it's crude shock humor. Other times it feels like a 2000s raunchy action comedy accidentally wandered into a Predator movie. Then you get jokes involving Tourette's syndrome that made a lot of people uncomfortable, and honestly, I get why. Because some of the comedy feels less like clever character writing and more like the movie trying desperately to prove how edgy and unfiltered it is. There's a difference between rough, natural banter and everybody constantly screams profanity because the movie thinks profanity equals personality. After a while, the swearing almost becomes white noise. And there's another issue too. The humor keeps stepping on emotional moments before they can breathe. The movie clearly wants you to care about Quinn and Rory. It wants the damaged soldier dynamic to matter emotionally. It wants moments of trauma, isolation, fear, and desperation to hit. But almost every serious beat gets interrupted before it fully lands. It's like the movie's terrified the audience might stop laughing for too long. That's why the tone starts feeling unstable instead of energetic. There's this ongoing identity crisis where the film doesn't seem sure whether it wants to be a hard R sci-fi horror movie, a Shane Black buddy, comedy, a satire of macho action films, a modern blockbuster franchise reboot, or a self-aware parody of Predator itself. And instead of choosing one lane and refining it, the movie just does all of them simultaneously, sometimes literally scene to scene. 1 minute the film is trying to be emotionally sincere about Rory being bullied because of his autism. The next minute there's a bizarre joke about predator biology or somebody getting mutilated in an over-the-top cartoonish way while characters yell punchlines at each other. It creates this strange disconnect where the audience never fully knows how seriously they're supposed to take anything, and because of that, even the genuinely funny moments lose impact over time. The humor becomes exhausting because the movie never stops reaching for it. There's no pacing to the comedy, no restraint. Every character is trying to be the funny one at the same time. That's another thing the earlier Predator movies understood better: contrast. The humor worked because it existed alongside tension, not instead of it. Dutch's team joked around in the original film because they were confident professionals before the fear kicked in. Once the Predator started hunting them, the atmosphere changed completely. In The Predator, the joking mostly continues no matter what's happening. Someone dies? Joke. Alien attack? Joke. Government conspiracy? Joke. End of the world? Another joke. Eventually, it starts making the movie feel emotionally weightless. Now, I do think some people were overly harsh on the comedic approach itself. I've seen reactions acting like the movie should have been completely humorless, and honestly, that probably wouldn't have worked either. Predator movies benefit from personality. The issue isn't that the film has humor. The issue is that the humor dominates the identity of the movie so aggressively that everything else becomes secondary, especially horror. This barely feels like horror most of the time. It feels closer to a loud action comedy with Predator imagery layered over it. And depending on your taste, that's either a fun reinvention or exactly the reason the movie fails. What's funny is that some viewers actually enjoyed the movie more once they stopped taking it seriously altogether. and I understand that too. If you approach The Predator almost like a chaotic spoof version of the franchise, parts of it become easier to accept. The exaggerated violence, the absurd dialogue, the over-the-top characters, it starts functioning more like midnight movie chaos than serious sci-fi. But again, that creates another problem. Should a Predator movie need to be viewed ironically in order to work? That's the question hanging over the entire film. Because underneath all the jokes and vulgarity and satire, you can still see moments where the movie almost becomes tense, almost becomes suspenseful, almost becomes genuinely creepy again. Then somebody says something dumb and the moment evaporates instantly. And that's basically the experience of watching The Predator in a nutshell. The movie keeps sabotaging its own atmosphere because it's so committed to being on all the time. Loud, funny, weird, hyperactive, self-aware, sometimes entertainingly so, sometimes unbearably so. And whether the humor works for you or not honestly determines your entire relationship with the movie. Because if the jokes don't land, the whole thing starts collapsing very quickly. At that point, all you're left with is a Predator movie that forgot the Predator was supposed to make you nervous. One of the reasons The Predator never fully works emotionally is because the movie mistakes personality for character depth. And there's actually a big difference between those two things. This film is packed with loud personalities. Everybody has a gimmick. Everybody has a quirk. Everybody has some kind of damage, attitude problem, psychological issue, sarcastic comeback, or weird behavioral trait. On paper, that probably sounded fun. This dysfunctional squad of unstable soldiers and outcasts forced together during an alien invasion. Honestly, it is kind of fun at first. The group dynamic is probably one of the more entertaining aspects of the movie early on because at least the characters don't feel bland in the traditional blockbuster sense. Nobody here acts like polished generic heroes. They're abrasive, awkward, chaotic, immature, constantly insulting each other. You can tell Shane Black wanted this rough, messy ensemble energy where everybody feels slightly broken. And sometimes the chemistry genuinely works. There are scenes where the squad starts bouncing off each other naturally, and the movie suddenly comes alive for a few minutes. The banter feels loose, random, almost improvised at times. Thomas Jane, Keegan-Michael Key, Trevante Rhodes, those guys especially understand the strange rhythm the movie is aiming for. It's less elite military unit and more group therapy session interrupted by aliens. That's actually a pretty entertaining concept. The problem is that the movie never really develops these people beyond the surface-level traits that introduce them. Most of the characters are memorable for how they behave, not for who they are. That distinction becomes more obvious the longer the movie goes on. At first, the exaggerated personalities help the film stand out from more generic action movies. But eventually you realize you don't actually know these people beyond their quirks. The Tourette's guy, the angry guy, the unstable guy, the sarcastic guy, the traumatized sniper dad, the tough scientist. They're introductions more than fully formed characters. And because of that, emotional investment becomes really difficult. The original Predator didn't have incredibly deep characters either, but it understood something important. Simplicity can still create attachment. Dutch's team felt believable as professionals. They had history together. Their confidence slowly breaking apart under pressure created tension naturally. In The Predator, everybody already feels exaggerated from the beginning, so there's nowhere emotionally for them to really go. That's why a lot of the emotional beats land awkwardly. The movie clearly wants you to care about Quinn McKenna and his son Rory. That relationship is basically the emotional backbone of the entire film. Quinn isn't fighting just to survive. He's trying to protect his son from becoming collateral damage in all this alien chaos. And honestly, I think that part almost works. Boyd Holbrook actually brings a pretty relaxed charm to Quinn. He's not trying to play the role like some invincible action icon. He feels tired, sarcastic, slightly detached from everything happening around him. There's something likable there. But the script doesn't really give him enough quiet moments to deepen the character. That's a recurring issue throughout the whole movie, actually. Every time somebody might start feeling emotionally real, the film immediately rushes into another joke, another argument, another action scene, another exposition dump. There's very little stillness. So instead of characters evolving emotionally, they mostly just keep talking louder. Rory is probably the most complicated example of this. Because Jacob Tremblay honestly does a solid job with the material he's given. There are moments where his scenes with Quinn feel grounded in a way the rest of the movie isn't. You can understand why Quinn's trying so hard to protect him. There's an actual emotional anchor there compared to all the military chaos happening around them. But then the screenplay keeps turning Rory into a plot device instead of a kid. That's where things start falling apart. The movie pushes this idea that Rory's autism allows him to understand and operate alien technology almost instantly, and the more the film leans into that concept, the less emotionally authentic the character starts feeling. Eventually, he stops feeling like a believable child and starts feeling like a shortcut for solving narrative problems, which is frustrating because there was potential there for a more grounded emotional story underneath everything else. Even Olivia Munn's character kind of suffers from this same issue. At first, Casey Brackett is introduced as this awkward scientist dragged into a horrifying situation, but very quickly, she transforms into this hyper-capable action participant sprinting through explosions and military shootouts like she's been in 6 Predator movies already. It's not that Olivia Munn is bad in the role. Honestly, she commits fully to the insanity of the film, but the character writing keeps prioritizing cool moments over believable development. That applies to almost everyone. The movie constantly gives characters traits instead of arcs, and weirdly enough, the supporting cast sometimes becomes more engaging than the actual lead because they're allowed to lean fully into the absurdity. Thomas Jane especially feels like he understands exactly what kind of movie he's in. Same with Keegan, Michael Key. Their scenes occasionally have this chaotic buddy comedy energy that almost tricks you into forgetting how thin the characterization actually is. Almost, because once the action slows down for even a second, you start noticing how little emotional weight the movie really has. Deaths happen, but they rarely hit hard. Conflicts happen, but they don't feel deeply personal. Relationships form incredibly quickly because the screenplay needs them to, not because the emotional progression feels earned. Even the group loyalty develops strangely fast. At a certain point, these soldiers are risking their lives for each other in ways that should feel powerful, but the movie hasn't really built enough emotional foundation underneath those choices. So instead of feeling moving, the scenes just feel functional, like the script checking boxes. And honestly, the constant humor makes that even harder. Because every serious emotional beat gets interrupted before it can settle, the film almost seems nervous about sincerity. Characters can't just have vulnerable moments. Somebody always has to crack a joke, swear aggressively, or undercut the tension somehow. So the emotional rhythm never stabilizes. And look, I don't think every Predator movie needs deep Oscar-level character writing. That's not really what people come to this franchise for. But the best entries still understood that tension only works when you care about the people being hunted. That's why the original cast was memorable. Not because they had giant emotional speeches, but because they felt like a real unit slowly realizing they were doomed. You believed their fear, their frustration, their panic, their exhaustion. In The Predator, most of the characters feel like they know they're in a movie. That self-awareness changes everything. Instead of tension, you get attitude. Instead of vulnerability, sarcasm. Instead of emotional progression, non-stop personality quirks bouncing around the screen. And again, sometimes that's entertaining. I don't want to act like the movie is completely lifeless because it isn't. There's energy here. There are scenes where the ensemble chemistry genuinely clicks. There are moments where the weird, dysfunctional squad dynamic becomes legitimately fun to watch. But emotional engagement? That's where the movie struggles badly. Because underneath all the jokes, shouting, and chaos, there just aren't many characters here that feel fully human. They feel designed. Designed to deliver one-liners. Designed to create banter. Designed to move the plot forward. Designed to give the movie attitude. But not necessarily designed to leave an emotional impact. And that's probably why, despite all the action and constant movement, the movie ends up feeling strangely hollow once it's over. You remember the noise. You remember the weird jokes. You remember the giant predator. But the characters themselves, most of them start fading from memory almost immediately. Okay, so this is probably the part of The Predator that created the most uncomfortable conversations around the movie. Because once the film starts leaning heavily into the Rory subplot and the whole autism as evolution idea, you can almost feel the audience collectively going, wait, what exactly is this movie trying to say? And honestly, I still don't fully know. What makes it complicated is that I don't think the movie is intentionally malicious. That's important to say first. I never got the sense that the film was mocking Rory or trying to portray him negatively. In fact, The movie clearly sees him as special, intelligent, important, arguably too important. That's where the problems start. Because Rory gradually stops feeling like a believable kid caught in an alien nightmare and starts becoming this near-superhuman narrative device, the movie bends itself around constantly. At first, the setup actually works reasonably well. Quinn sends the Predator technology away, trying to protect evidence before the government silences him, and the package accidentally ends up with Rory. That's a decent hook. The idea of a curious kid unknowingly activating dangerous alien tech? Sure, there's tension there. And Jacob Tremblay honestly does a good job with the material. That's another thing that makes this whole subplot frustrating instead of outright terrible. Tremblay gives a pretty grounded performance considering how bizarre the writing becomes around him later. Early on, Rory actually feels more emotionally believable than a lot of the adults in the movie. There's awkwardness there, isolation there, intelligence there. His scenes with Quinn are some of the few moments where the film almost settles into something emotionally sincere. But then the movie starts escalating the concept. Fast. Suddenly, Rory isn't just smart, he's effortlessly deciphering alien language systems and operating Predator technology almost instantly. Scientists and military experts struggle to understand this equipment. Meanwhile, this kid is casually activating it like he's updating an iPhone. And the more the movie leans into that idea, the stranger the messaging becomes. Because eventually the film starts circling this concept that autism represents the next step in human evolution. And when that line of thinking enters the story, things get really awkward really fast. Not just because it's scientifically ridiculous, which it is, but because the movie handles the subject with almost no nuance whatsoever. It throws these huge ideas around in blockbuster exposition scenes without really understanding the implications of what it's saying. And the tone of the movie makes it even harder to process. Because this isn't some thoughtful sci-fi drama carefully exploring neurodiversity, this is still a loud, chaotic Predator movie full of explosions, crude jokes, dismemberments, and sarcastic banter. So when the script suddenly starts treating autism like a key to humanity's evolutionary future, it creates this bizarre disconnect. The movie wants emotional seriousness without slowing down enough to earn it. That's probably why reactions became so divided. Some viewers didn't find the subplot offensive at all. They saw it as exaggerated sci-fi nonsense in the same tradition as a lot of 80s and 90s blockbuster storytelling, almost comic book logic. And honestly, I can understand that perspective. But for other viewers, especially people actually on the autism spectrum or parents of autistic children, the storyline felt clumsy, unrealistic, and kind of uncomfortable. Because the film keeps drifting into movie autism territory. You know exactly what I mean too. The exaggerated savant-style depiction, where the character suddenly possesses near-magical abilities connected to intelligence or pattern recognition. Hollywood has done this a million times, and the Predator pushes that trope into full sci-fi absurdity. Rory becomes less of a child character and more of a plot solution generator. Alien language? Rory understands it. Predator technology? Rory figures it out. Need the story to move forward? Rory activates something. The movie keeps using him as a shortcut for exposition and progression instead of developing him naturally as a person. And weirdly enough, the film occasionally almost handles the emotional side properly. There are scenes involving bullying, social isolation, and Quinn trying to connect with his son that feel grounded enough to work. You can tell the movie genuinely wants the audience to empathize with Rory rather than pity him. That part's important. But then the screenplay swings back into these giant, exaggerated ideas about evolution and alien compatibility, and suddenly, the emotional sincerity evaporates again. That tonal inconsistency hurts the subplot badly. The movie never really decides whether Rory is supposed to be a realistic autistic child, a symbolic next stage of humanity figure, a vulnerable emotional anchor, or basically a sci-fi chosen one, so he becomes all of them at once. And honestly, that's too much pressure for one character in an already overcrowded movie. There's also this weird side effect where the more special the movie makes Rory, the less believable the danger around him starts feeling. He begins navigating situations with this almost supernatural competence that pulls tension out of scenes instead of increasing it, which is ironic because the subplot clearly exists to raise emotional stakes. Instead, it often creates confusion. And then there's the larger issue nobody can really ignore, The film uses neurodivergence and Tourette's syndrome repeatedly as sources of comedy and quirky character behavior, while simultaneously asking for emotional seriousness around those same topics. That balancing act never fully works. Some of the Tourette's-related humor especially feels uncomfortable because the movie can't seem to decide whether it's satirizing insensitive behavior or participating in it. The line gets blurry. Again, intention matters, and I genuinely don't think the film is trying to be cruel. But execution matters too. And the execution here is all over the place. What's frustrating is that there actually was potential for a meaningful emotional storyline buried underneath all this chaos. A father struggling to protect his misunderstood son during a catastrophic alien threat? That works. There's real emotional material there, especially within a franchise that usually prioritizes survival and military action over family dynamics. But the movie keeps overcomplicating the idea. Instead of trusting smaller emotional moments, it tries to transform Rory into this massive franchise mythology centerpiece. The script treats him less like a human being and more like the key to the future of mankind. That's when the subplot fully loses itself. And honestly, the audience reaction to all this kinda reflects the movie itself. Confused, conflicted, unsure how seriously to take any of it. Because depending on your perspective, the subplot is ambitious but clumsy, unintentionally ridiculous, emotionally sincere but poorly handled, or just completely absurd from the start. Personally, I think it's a combination of all four. There are moments where the movie genuinely seems to care about Rory and Quinn's relationship, moments where you can see a more emotional version of the Predator struggling to break through all the noise. But the film keeps burying those moments under giant sci-fi mythology concepts it doesn't fully know how to handle. And by the end, the whole autism as evolution angle becomes one of those choices people remember, not because it added depth to the movie, but because everybody left the theater trying to figure out why the movie went there in the first place. That's really the story of the Predator as a whole, honestly. Interesting idea. Zero restraint. One thing I'll definitely give the Predator credit for, even when the movie is completely losing its mind structurally, the cast is at least trying, like genuinely trying. This could have very easily turned into one of those paycheck ensemble movies where everybody looks bored standing in front of green screens waiting for CGI explosions to get added later. But for the most part, the actors commit to the chaos. Sometimes maybe too much, honestly, but at least there's energy in the performances. And weirdly enough, the supporting cast often ends up carrying the movie harder than the actual lead. Boyd Holbrook as Quinn McKenna is fine. I don't dislike him in the role at all. In fact, I think his more laid-back approach probably helps the movie in places because if he played Quinn like a screaming, ultra-intense action hero, the whole thing might have become unbearable. He's got this tired, sarcastic vibe throughout the film that works reasonably well. He feels like somebody who's already exhausted before the real nightmare even starts. There's a naturalness to him that keeps Quinn from becoming completely generic, but at the same time, he never fully dominates the movie the way a Predator lead probably needs to. That's the thing. Arnold Schwarzenegger in the original film had presence. Danny Glover in Predator 2 brought personality. Adrian Brody in Predators at least had this cold survivalist intensity. Holbrook feels more like he's drifting through the movie, reacting to increasingly insane events around him. Sometimes that works in the film's favor. Other times it makes the central character feel strangely overshadowed by everybody else. And honestly, everybody else is trying really hard to stand out. Thomas Jane probably understands the tone of the movie better than almost anyone here. He fully commits to the weirdness. Same with Keegan-Michael Key. Their scenes together occasionally feel like they wandered in from a completely different Shane Black movie, some dark buddy comedy where emotionally unstable soldiers argue while aliens happen in the background. But weirdly, those scenes are also some of the most entertaining parts of the movie. Not because the writing is always brilliant, but because the actors know how to sell chaotic dialogue rhythmically. They interrupt each other naturally, react awkwardly, stumble into punchlines instead of delivering them perfectly. It feels messy in a human way. Trevante Rhodes brings good energy too. Honestly, the whole misfit squad works better as a dysfunctional ensemble than as believable military characters. Once you stop expecting realism and just accept them as loud, damaged weirdos surviving together, parts of the chemistry start clicking. That said, the movie also leans way too hard on exaggerated personality quirks instead of actual character depth. So while the cast is memorable in flashes, most of the characters themselves still feel thin underneath all the banter. Olivia Munn's Casey Brackett is probably the clearest example of that contradiction. She's introduced as this awkward scientist suddenly dragged into horrifying alien insanity, which could have been a fun angle. And, to Munn's credit, she throws herself into the role completely. She never looks embarrassed by the material, even when the movie becomes absolutely ridiculous. But the character itself changes constantly depending on what the scene needs. One minute she's nervous and overwhelmed, the next she's sprinting through military combat situations like she's been hunting predators her whole life. The movie basically transforms her from biologist into action hero halfway through without really earning that shift emotionally. Still, Munn does enough with sheer commitment to make the performance watchable. Sterling K. Brown, meanwhile, feels like he's having the time of his life playing the government operative character. He's chewing scenery constantly, but honestly, the movie almost needs that kind of exaggerated energy at that point. The film is already operating at maximum chaos anyway, so subtle performances probably wouldn't survive inside it. Jacob Tremblay's performance is interesting because he's actually dealing with some of the film's messiest material and somehow still keeps Rory relatively grounded. That's not easy. The writing around Rory becomes increasingly absurd as the movie goes on, especially once the autism is evolution stuff really kicks in. But Tremblay himself never turns the character into a caricature. He plays Rory sincerely. If you approach the movie like a chaotic franchise playground, there's definitely entertainment in that. But for others, the callbacks almost become frustrating because they constantly remind you of a stronger movie. Especially when the film starts quoting or echoing moments tied to suspense and tension the current movie doesn't really have. That contrast becomes impossible to ignore after a while. The original Predator films use references sparingly because they trusted atmosphere more than fan service. The Predator often feels like it's trying to compensate for tonal instability by layering nostalgic elements over everything, sometimes successfully, sometimes awkwardly. And then there's the broader mythology callbacks too. References to Predator technology, government cover-ups, earlier encounters, hunting traditions, species evolution. The movie clearly wants to position itself as a major expansion of the franchise timeline. Again, not automatically a bad idea. But the film keeps adding references and lore faster than it develops emotional investment in the current story. So instead of deepening the experience, some of the callbacks start feeling like franchise bookkeeping. Like the movie's more interested in building connective tissue than creating atmosphere. Even the ending feels shaped around future franchise possibilities instead of just concluding the story naturally. It's obsessed with what comes next. Bigger mythology, bigger threats, bigger Predator concepts. And while I understand the temptation, it also weakens the self-contained identity of the film itself, because the best Predator movies never really felt like universe building. They felt immediate, survival-focused, claustrophobic. This movie keeps looking outward instead. Still, I don't want to pretend none of the nostalgia works because parts of it absolutely do. Hearing shades of the old score again genuinely helps certain sequences. Some visual callbacks hit that sweet spot where longtime fans immediately recognize them without the movie stopping dead to explain the reference. A few Easter eggs are actually pretty clever, and honestly, there's something weirdly charming about how much the film wants to reconnect with the franchise roots, even while simultaneously pulling the series in a completely different direction tonally. That contradiction defines the entire movie. It wants the credibility of the original films while behaving nothing like them. It wants to modernize Predator while constantly looking backward. It wants to reinvent the mythology while depending heavily on nostalgia. And sometimes those competing instincts accidentally create interesting moments. Other times, they just make the movie feel uncertain about its own identity. That's probably why the callbacks leave such mixed impressions overall. Individually, some of them are fun. The score works. Certain references land. The franchise DNA is definitely still visible. But collectively, they also highlight how far the series has drifted away from the thing audiences connected with originally. Because every time the music swells or an old visual motif returns, you briefly remember what Predator used to feel like: quiet, tense, patient, dangerous. Then, the Predator immediately crashes back into another loud CGI action scene, and the nostalgia spell breaks all over again. So after everything, the weird humor, the giant upgraded Predator, The non-stop tonal whiplash, the messy storytelling, the surprisingly fun moments, the exhausting chaos. Where does The Predator actually land? Honestly, it's one of the strangest franchise movies I've seen in years because I completely understand both the people who hate it and the people who kinda enjoy it. Usually with movies like this, I lean pretty firmly one direction. Either the backlash feels overblown or the defenders are coping hard. But The Predator sits in this awkward middle space where the movie genuinely is a mess, while also occasionally being entertaining enough that I can't fully write it off either. It's frustrating more than anything else. Because this isn't a lifeless movie. That's important. You can feel energy in it constantly. Shane Black's personality is all over the film whether you like his choices or not. The cast commits hard. The action has moments. Some of the visuals work really well. Certain jokes genuinely land. A few scenes briefly capture the ugly, chaotic fun the movie thinks it's delivering consistently. There are flashes, always flashes, of a much better Predator movie hidden inside this thing. That's what makes the disappointment sting more. Because at no point does The Predator feel like a cynical cash grab made by people who didn't care. If anything, it almost feels like the opposite problem. Too many ideas, too many tones, too many attempts to reinvent the franchise simultaneously. The movie keeps throwing concepts at the audience hoping sheer energy can glue everything together. Sometimes it works for 5 minutes, then it immediately falls apart again. And honestly, I think the film's biggest issue is that it fundamentally misunderstands what made Predator special in the first place. Not visually. The movie understands the iconography, the masks, the cloaking effects, the weapons, the hunting imagery, all that's still here. But tonally, atmospherically, emotionally, that's where the disconnect happens. The original Predator wasn't just memorable because the creature looked cool. It worked because the movie created tension, isolation, simplicity, fear. It understood restraint. It let suspense breathe. The Predator felt dangerous because the film treated it like a lurking nightmare instead of a loud blockbuster mascot. The Predator rarely believes in restraint. Every instinct this movie has pushes toward more. More mythology, more comedy, more violence, more spectacle, more characters, more CGI. Bigger stakes, bigger Predator, bigger finale. And eventually, the movie becomes so overloaded that it starts collapsing under its own weight. That's why the film feels so strangely hollow despite constantly screaming for your attention. There's always movement, always noise, always energy, but very little tension underneath it. Very little emotional grounding. Very little atmosphere that lingers after scenes end. Even the action, which is entertaining at points, eventually starts blending together because the movie never changes rhythm. Everything's operating at maximum volume all the time. And then there's the humor. Honestly, I think whether the movie works for someone at all mostly depends on how much they connect with Shane Black's comedic approach here. If the sarcastic banter and chaotic vulgar energy clicks for you, the movie probably stays watchable even when the plot starts unraveling. If the humor doesn't work for you, the whole thing probably becomes unbearable pretty quickly. Because the comedy dominates everything. Horror, suspense, emotional scenes, all of it gets filtered through this relentless ironic tone that keeps undercutting itself. The movie rarely lets moments stay serious long enough to actually hit emotionally, which is a huge problem for Predator specifically. The creature stops feeling scary. And once that happens, the franchise loses part of its identity automatically. That's probably why the movie became so divisive among longtime fans. Not because people demanded a carbon copy remake of the 1987 original, but because they wanted the Predator to feel intimidating again, dangerous again, mysterious again. Instead, the movie turns the creatures into giant franchise mythology delivery systems wrapped in CGI spectacle. And honestly, that's where the Predator feels most modern in the worst possible way. It has that studio franchise obsession with escalation. Everything needs to be expanded, upgraded, explained, sequel-ready universe building. The film feels less interested in telling one strong Predator story than in turning Predator into a louder blockbuster property. Which is ironic because the franchise was always strongest when it stayed relatively simple. Still, despite all of that, I can't fully hate this movie. I really can't. There's something weirdly watchable about it, even when it's failing. Some of the cast chemistry works. A few action sequences genuinely deliver. The movie at least commits to being violent and chaotic instead of watered down and safe. And unlike some modern franchise films that feel assembled by algorithm, this thing actually has personality. Messy personality, completely unstable personality, but personality. And honestly, I'll take a bizarre, flawed movie over a forgettable, empty one most days. That doesn't make The Predator good, though. Not really. It's entertaining in fragments, frustrating as a whole. A movie full of individual moments that never fully merge into a satisfying experience. Every strength immediately collides with another weakness. Every cool idea gets overcomplicated. Every tense moment gets interrupted. Every interesting character beat gets buried under noise. It's basically cinematic overstimulation, and the weirdest part is that the film almost seems aware of its own chaos. There's this self-aware energy running through it where the movie knows it's absurd, knows it's excessive, knows it's bouncing between tones recklessly. Sometimes that self-awareness becomes part of the fun. Other times, it just makes the lack of focus even more obvious. By the time the credits rolled, I didn't feel angry at the movie as much as exhausted by it. That's the word I keep coming back to. Exhausting. Not because nothing happens, if anything, far too much happens, but because the movie never stops trying to top itself. It keeps escalating long after the story needed to settle down and focus. And honestly, I think history's probably going to remember The Predator as one of those fascinating failed franchise revivals. Not the worst Predator movie ever made to some people. Not secretly underrated either. Just deeply conflicted. A film caught between old-school Predator horror, Shane Black buddy comedy chaos, modern blockbuster franchise logic, and aggressive mythology expansion. None of those pieces fully fit together. But every once in a while, usually for a few minutes at a time, they almost do. And those brief flashes are what make the movie strangely memorable despite everything wrong with it. Because underneath all the noise, there really was potential here. The movie just never stopped long enough to find it.